The 9 realms had never felt quiet, but they had always felt stable, like a great house standing in a hard wind. Now that house was starting to crack. Ash fell from the sky in slow gray streams, and it was not dead ash, but living ash that moved like tiny insects in the air. It drifted over forests, rivers, stone roads, and burning cliffs, and everywhere it landed, old roots shivered and weak cracks opened in the ground. Odin saw the signs first because he
The air around Yggdrasil stayed cold and still, like the world itself was holding its breath. Its vast roots stretched under the ground like black rivers, and faint light pulsed through the cracked bark above them. Odin, Thor, Loki, and Skadi moved back toward the great tree in silence, each of them carrying a different fear and each of them knowing the same simple truth. The warning they had just survived was not the end. It was only the first sign that the seal below was weakening again, and if it broke, every realm would be shaken at once. Odin led the way with his tall staff held close, his one eye fixed ahead, his weathered face hard with thought. He was the wise ruler of the gods, but wisdom did not make this easier. He wanted to protect the realms, yet he also knew he could not hold them together alone. Thor walked beside him like a storm-given shape, his red hair bright even in the dim light, his thick beard and bronze armor marked by the strain of battle. He wanted action, not delay, and he hated the feeling of helplessness that came from waiting on an enemy he could not see. Loki followed with quiet steps, his black hair falling near sharp green eyes, his dark clothes neat and elegant, his face calm while his mind moved quickly. He wanted answers, and he wanted them before fear turned every ally into a suspect. Skadi kept near the edge of the group, tall and steady, her silver hair pale against her white and gray armor with fur trim. She had the calm look of a mountain queen, but her guarded eyes showed a woman who had seen too much ruin to trust easily. Together, they returned to the tree because the realms needed them, and because none of them could afford to pretend the danger was over. When they reached the giant roots, the living ash made its presence known again. It drifted through the broken air like gray sparks that refused to settle, and wherever it touched stone or wood, thin cracks began to spread. The ash was not normal dust. It was a strange, dangerous thing, alive in a twisted way, and Odin explained what had become clear to him below the tree. Long ago, the roots of Yggdrasil had been bound with seals carved by the first guardians, and those seals were anchored by the ancient anchor stone. The stone was not just a heavy relic. It was the heart of the prison, the one object that held the rules of the realms in place. If the stone shifted, the seal could fail. If the seal failed, the titan beast beneath the roots could wake fully, and its power could tear open the hidden paths between worlds. Thor stared at the dark earth and understood the danger at once. This was not about one beast breaking free. This was about all the realms losing the walls that kept them separate. Loki crouched near a crack in the ground and touched the edge without crossing it. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time his sly face lost some of its easy confidence. He noticed something the others had missed. The living ash was not only leaking from the broken roots. It was being drawn toward one point under the tree, as if someone below was feeding it on purpose. Before Odin could answer, the ground gave a deep shudder, and a low sound rolled upward through the roots. It was the titan beast chained beneath Yggdrasil, stirring in its sleep. The sound was so heavy that it made Thor take a step back, and Skadi raised her hand to keep the others from moving too fast. Then Vance emerged from the shadow of a split root, his white hair stark against the dark, his pale face cold and severe, his black robes lined with red ash marks that seemed to pulse in the dim glow. He looked less like a man and more like a judge who had decided the world was already guilty. Vance did not come forward with fear, he came forward with purpose. He said the seal was doomed, that the realms were already rotting from inside, and that the titan beast was not the true enemy. In his view, the creature beneath the tree was a lock, not a monster, and the only way to save the worlds was to break that lock before the pressure inside it shattered everything on its own. He wanted the anchor stone because he believed control through ruin was still control. He had watched the realms grow divided, watched their rulers argue, and watched weak peace hide bigger collapse. In his mind, the old order was already failing, and the titan beast was the key to forcing a harsher, stronger world into being. Odin saw the danger in that logic at once. Vance was not trying to destroy the realms out of simple hate. He was trying to save them with a terrible method, and that made him harder to stop, because he truly believed he was the only one willing to do what had to be done. Thor tightened his grip on his hammer and stepped in front of the others. He told Vance that breaking the seal would not save anyone, and that fear was making him reckless. Vance answered with a cold laugh and said that Thor still thought strength meant protection, when strength often only delayed the fall. The words struck hard because they carried part of the truth. Then the ground split wider, and a burst of living ash rose around them like a sudden gray storm. The cracked roots trembled, the light inside Yggdrasil flickered, and far below came the violent pull of something huge testing its chains. Thor swung his hammer once, sending a heavy shock through the ash and driving it back long enough for the others to move. Skadi drew a carved blade of pale metal and cut through a line of ash that was creeping toward the anchor stone. Loki moved with quick, precise steps, using the shadows between the roots to slip behind the broken stone housing that protected the seal. Odin planted his staff and spoke words of old power, trying to steady the roots long enough to buy them time. But time was running out faster than any of them expected. Loki found the first real clue inside the broken housing, and it changed everything. The anchor stone had not only cracked. Someone had already tampered with its binding marks from the inside. That meant Vance had not simply arrived to take advantage of the failure. He had helped create the failure in small steps, feeding the cracks with living ash and guiding the damage until the seal began to fail on its own. Loki looked up slowly, and his sharp green eyes met Odin's with a new and serious understanding. Vance had not come to win a battle, he had come to force a choice. If the heroes did nothing, the seal would break on its own. If they rushed to repair it without understanding the hidden damage, they might trigger the Titan beast early. Vance had built his plan around panic, because panic made even wise people make fast mistakes. That was his true weapon. Odin felt the weight of that truth settle on his shoulders. He had spent so long carrying duty that he almost mistook it for strength. Now he saw the harder lesson. Being wise meant listening, even when the answer angered him. He lowered his staff a little and asked Loki what the markings meant. Loki explained that the red ash on Vance's robes was not decoration. It was residue from repeated contact with the living ash, which meant Vance had been working near the roots for a long time. Skadi then spoke up, her voice steady and clear, and she revealed that she had found old mountain records about a hidden prison beneath the World Tree. Those records said the Titan beast was not born to rule. It had been made long ago from broken power, chained under the roots because it could absorb the pain of all the realms. As long as the beast remained bound, the realms stayed separated and balanced. If it was released too soon, that stored power would not save the worlds, it would flood them. That revelation hit them all in different ways. Thor looked shocked because he had assumed they were facing a simple prison break, not an ancient machine of balance. Loki looked troubled because the truth made Vance seem less like a madman and more like a man who had studied the system and chosen the worst answer. Odin looked toward the roots and understood the deepest danger of all. The Titan beast was not only a threat, it was also a burden that had held the realms together for ages, and removing it without a better plan could ruin everything it had been holding back. Yet the beast could not stay forever either, because the cracks were spreading now and the seal was failing under the pressure of time. This was the real war, not good against evil but survival against collapse. Vance sensed the shift in the group and made his move. He raised his hand toward the anchor stone, and the ash around his fingers glowed brighter. He said that hesitation was the same as surrender, and that every delay only made the eventual break worse. Then he sent a wave of ash toward the seal housing, not as a direct attack, but as a push meant to finish the damage he had already started. Thor charged at once, hammer lifted high, and Skadi moved to block the line of ash, while Loki darted toward Vance from the side, hoping to knock him away before the final break. Odin saw the shape of the trap in a single instant. If they fought Vance with force alone, the shock could crack the seal wide open. So he shouted for them to stop and hold back, even as the ash storm closed around them. In that moment, the old man with the one eye chose a harder path than battle. He chose control. He drove his staff into the ground, and the light of Yggdrasil surged through the roots in answer. The pulse slowed the ash, but it did not stop it completely. Thor held his strike back by a single breath, muscles tense, teeth set, forced to trust Odin instead of charging blindly. Loki slipped under Vance instead of striking him, reaching for the binding marks on the broken stone. Skadi planted her feet and held the line with silent force, her calm face showing how much effort it took not to be pushed back. For one long moment, the entire field hung between collapse and recovery. Then Loki found the hidden latch in the rune work and twisted it free, and the ash surge faltered. Vance turned sharply, anger flashing across his face for the first time because he realized his hidden damage had been exposed. The seal was still failing, but now the others understood how it had been wounded. Vance backed into the shadows, not beaten but delayed. He stared at Odin with cold respect and said that wisdom had only bought a little time. Then he vanished deeper into the roots before anyone could catch him. The Titan beast below answered with one massive shake, and the whole world tree groaned from the force. Dust fell from the branches above, the cracks in the roots widened, and the living ash swirled in wild circles. Thor wanted to chase Vance, but Odin stopped him with a look and a raised hand. This was not the moment for pride. This was the moment for survival. The heroes gathered around the anchor stone, and for the first time they worked together without arguing. Thor guarded the open path, Skadi watched the deeper shadows, Loki studied the runes for a second layer of damage, and Odin pressed both hands to the glowing bark of Yggdrasil. They had survived the warning, but the warning had changed them. Each of them now knew the enemy was clever, patient, and willing to sacrifice the world for his own idea of salvation. As the light faded, Odin looked down into the cracked earth and understood the truth that would drive the next chapter. The Titan beast was waking in small pieces, and Vance had already prepared the board for the next move. Somewhere beneath the roots there was more than a prison and more than a monster. There was a secret waiting to be found, one that could explain why the beast had been bound in the first place. Odin did not say that out loud yet, but Loki saw it in his face, and Skadi felt it in the silence, and Thor sensed that the war had just become larger than anger or strength. The group stood together beneath the broken roots of Yggdrasil, worn down but not broken, while above them the sacred tree continued to glow through the dark. The next answer was still hidden, and the next danger was already moving toward them. Below the broken roots of Yggdrasil, the air stayed cold and heavy, and the strange living ash drifted through the dark like gray sparks with a mind of its own. The sacred tree above them glowed with a soft gold light, but that light did not reach far enough to make the place feel safe. Odin stood at the center of the group, his long gray hair hanging over silver armor, his dark blue cloak still dusted with ash, and his one eye fixed on the cracked stone before him. Thor waited at his side like a storm held in one hand, with red hair, a thick beard, bronze armor, and a hammer gripped so hard that his knuckles had gone white. Loki stayed a little behind them, slim and quiet, with black hair, sharp green eyes, and elegant dark clothing that made him look calm even when danger was close. Skadi stood near the roots with silver hair and pale skin, her layered white and gray armor lined with fur, her face hard and guarded, like a queen who never forgot the cost of a mistake. They had just found proof that the Titan beast was not only chained, but sealed for a reason that touched every realm, and now they all felt the same fear rising in silence, because if that seal failed, the damage would not stop beneath the tree. It would spread everywhere. Odin knelt beside the broken stone and brushed away the living ash with the tip of his staff. The ash hissed softly as it touched the ground, then crawled into the cracks like it wanted to feed them. The old god did not speak at first, because the shape carved into the stone was worse than he had hoped. It was the anchor stone, an ancient rune-carved block used to hold the seals of the realms in place, and its glowing lines were split in 3 places. That meant the prison of the Titan beast had not been built only to keep a monster down. It had been built to keep something from pushing up through the roots and into the world above. Loki saw the realization in Odin's face before anyone else did, and he leaned forward with a sharp look. He wanted the truth because his mind never rested, and because secrets always made him suspicious. Skadi wanted the same truth, but for another reason. She had spent her life guarding hard rules, and she needed to know whether those rules had been wise or only old. Thor wanted action, not guesses, because he believed the realms could be saved if someone strong enough stood in the right place and never backed down. Odin finally spoke in a low voice and said the prison was failing from both sides, below and above, which meant the Titan beast was not the only threat. Someone was helping the seals fail. That was the first clear sign that this was no accident, it was an attack. As if to answer him, the ground gave a slow tremor, and a sheet of living ash poured from a split in the roots. It moved like a living cloud, spreading across stone, wood, and armor, and every place it touched began to crack with faint gray light. Thor stepped forward and slammed his hammer once into the floor. The impact sent a ring of force through the chamber and pushed the ash back for a moment, but more drifted down from above. Loki pulled a curved blade from his side and cut through the drifting cloud, not because steel could defeat it, but because he knew the ash clung to movement and heat. Skadi raised both hands and called cold air from the lower tunnels, and the frost slowed the ash long enough for Odin to place his staff against the anchor stone. The runes on the stone glowed brighter, and a deep hum passed through the roots of Yggdrasil. Then, from far below, came a chain sound so deep and large that it seemed to shake the bones of the world. The Titan beast had moved. It was still bound, but it had felt the weakness in the seal, and that meant it was waking up. Thor looked toward the darkness with a fierce face, ready to charge, but Odin held up one hand and stopped him. The old god knew brute force alone would not hold this place together. They needed the missing part of the truth, and they needed it now. That was when Vance stepped out of the dark passage behind them. He was a cold man with white hair, pale skin, a narrow face, and black ceremonial robes marked with red ash lines that looked like old burns. His expression carried no anger and no fear, only a severe kind of certainty. He was not there to fight in the way Thor expected. He was there to prove a point. Vance said the realms were already breaking and that the Titan beast was the cause of that weakness, not the cure. He said the anchor stone had always been a lie built by frightened rulers, and that the only way to save the realms was to break the old seal, let the beast rise fully, and use its power to tear away the failing order before all worlds collapsed on their own. His words were cold, but they made a twisted kind of sense at first. He believed destruction was wisdom because he thought only a total reset could stop a slower ruin. Skadi understood his logic at once, and that made her more troubled, not less. She knew he was wrong, but she also knew he was not lying about the weakness of the realms. Loki saw the hidden edge in Vance's plan and understood something else. Vance did not want balance. He wanted control over the chaos that came after the break. Odin narrowed his eye and asked who had shown him the way here. Vance only smiled a little and said that the answers had already chosen him. Then he threw a handful of living ash into the air, and the chamber exploded into motion. The ash rushed toward the roots in a thick gray wave, and the cracks on the anchor stone lit up like trapped fire. Thor leaped into the path of the cloud and swung his hammer in a wide arc, blasting the front line back and forcing the rest to scatter. Skadi moved with sharp grace, driving frozen wind low across the floor so the ash would harden and fall. Loki slipped between broken stones and reached the side of the anchor stone, where he saw tiny rune marks hidden under the larger ones. The marks were old and they had been carved by hand, not by magic. That meant someone had altered the seal after it was built. Loki understood the meaning in a single breath, and the revelation hit him harder than the ash. Odin had not only guarded the prison, he had also hidden the true lock beneath it. He had done it to keep the beast from ever being used as a weapon, even by the gods themselves. The silence around that truth lasted only a moment, but it was enough to change the shape of the room. Thor looked at Odin with shock, because now he understood why the old god had never spoken fully. Odin had feared that if the truth spread, greed would follow, and greed would turn the Titan beast into a tool for power. Skadi felt both anger and respect, because she knew what it meant to carry a hard secret alone. Vance saw the change in them and pressed harder, saying Odin had lied to save a system that was already rotting. Then the chamber shook again, more violently this time, and one of the great roots above them split open with a bright flash of gold. Through that opening came a heavy sound, like a giant body pulling against chains, and all at once everyone understood the next danger. The Titan beast was no longer only below them, it was answering the crack in the seal. Odin did not waste another second. He ordered Thor to guard the left side of the chamber, Skadi to hold the frost line, and Loki to read the hidden runes before Vance could twist them further. For once, no one argued. Thor planted his feet and became a wall of bronze and thunder, his red cape whipping behind him as he drove the living ash back every time it surged. Skadi spread a veil of white cold across the roots, slowing the spreading cracks and protecting the anchor stone from collapse. Loki crouched beside the hidden marks and traced them with 2 fingers, reading old warnings carved into the stone by hands long gone. The message was simple and terrible. The Titan beast had not been bound only because it was dangerous. It had been bound because it was the final seal that held a buried force from reaching the realms. If the beast broke free, the force beneath it would wake as well. That was the true reason Odin looked burdened when the stone was found. He had remembered the first war, the one no story ever told in full. Vance heard part of the warning and went still for the first time, because even his cold faith in ruin could not ignore a threat that large. He had believed breaking the seal would create a clean path forward, but now he understood that he was standing at the edge of something far older and far worse than he had planned. The Titan beast roared from below, the roots of Yggdrasil shuddered, and the sacred glow above them dimmed for one painful heartbeat. Odin raised his staff, his face set in grim resolve, and said the next step would decide whether the realms held together or tore apart. Then far below the floor, another chain snapped tight, and the darkness answered back. The chamber beneath Yggdrasil trembled as if the whole world had begun to breathe in pain. Strange, gray living ash drifted through the broken stone floor, and each grain clung to the cracks like tiny, glowing insects. Odin stood at the front of the broken path, his single eye fixed on the darkness below, while his long gray hair moved in the cold wind that rose from the deep. Beside him, Thor planted his boots hard on the shaking ground, red hair wild, beard bristling, bronze armor shining under the dim sacred light. Loki watched from the side with black hair, sharp green eyes, and a calm face that hid his fear. Skadi stood steady behind them, silver hair tied back, white and gray armor dusted with ash, her pale face set in quiet focus. Vance waited near the far edge of the chamber, white hair pale as frost, black robes marked with red ash lines, his cold eyes fixed on the dark like a man watching a plan finally awaken. The problem was clear now. If the Titan beast broke free, the roots of Yggdrasil would crack open, and the seals that held the realms together would fail one by one. Odin lifted his staff higher, and the air around the rune-carved wood grew tighter, almost like a held breath. He knew the anchor stone was the only thing still holding the deepest seal in place, and he knew it had already begun to weaken. Long ago, before this chamber was hidden, the anchor stone had been placed here by wise hands to keep the Titan beast buried and calm. That monster was not only strong. It was old, trapped, and furious, and every chain around it had a purpose. Vance had learned that truth long before the others. He believed the world tree was failing because the seals were too old, and he wanted to break them on purpose, then rebuild the realms through ruin and force. He did not see that as evil, he saw it as wisdom. In his mind, only a world that survived destruction deserved to remain. That made him dangerous because he was not driven by rage, he was driven by belief. The snap below came again, and this time the sound rolled up through the stone like a cruel drumbeat. Thor stepped forward at once, his hammer raised, his face hard with stubborn courage. He wanted to smash the chains open and strike the Titan beast before it could rise any farther, but Odin stopped him with one sharp motion of the staff. A sudden attack might shatter the chamber and tear open the roots of Yggdrasil faster. Loki, who rarely wasted a glance, looked down at the spread of living ash and noticed something no one else had seen. The ash was not random. It was moving toward the anchor stone in thin lines, as if something below was guiding it with purpose. He spoke quickly, calm but urgent, and told Odin that the ash was eating at the runes. Skadi crouched and brushed the floor with 2 fingers, then looked up with a guarded frown. She said the ash was not only weakening the stone. It was carrying old magic, the kind that learned where to go and how to break what stood in its way. That meant the danger was already smarter than they had hoped. Odin did not answer at first. He looked at the roots above them, then at the dark crack in the center of the floor, then at each of his companions. He had guided the realms through war, hunger, and fear, but this was different. This was not a simple enemy at the gate. This was a wound under the world. He finally spoke in a low, steady voice and said the next step had to be careful. One wrong move could let the Titan beast lunge up through the floor and throw the chamber into chaos. He ordered Thor to hold the front, Loki to track the ash, and Skadi to guard the path behind them. Then he turned his single eye toward Vance and asked the one question that mattered. How much did Vance already know about the chain that had just snapped tight? Vance did not look surprised. He only folded his hands inside his dark sleeves and said that a seal always makes a liar of hope. He said the chain had snapped because the realm had reached its honest end. His answer was so cold that even Thor went still. Then the floor shuddered hard enough to split the loose stones apart. A thick shadow moved under the crack, huge enough to make the sacred glow above them flicker again. The Titan beast shifted in its pit, and the runes across its massive body flashed like warning marks under deep water. The chains around it pulled tight, then loosened, then pulled again, as if some hidden force below was testing each link. Odin raised his staff, and a ring of pale light spread around the group, keeping the living ash back for a few heartbeats. Loki took that opening and moved to the far side of the chamber, where he found a narrow stair cut into the rock and half covered by ash. It led downward, toward a lower seal room that no one had mentioned before. That was the first true twist. The chamber they had entered was not the final prison, it was only the upper lock. There was another chamber beneath them, and if the lower seal failed, the world would feel the full weight of the Titan beast waking. Thor stared at the stair with open shock, then gave a rough laugh that sounded more like anger than humor. He wanted a simple fight, a clear enemy, and a path he could break with strength. Instead, the world had given him layers of old fear. Skadi was the first to move beside Odin, her calm face hardening into resolve. She said the lower chamber had to be reached before the ash covered the stairs completely. Loki agreed, but he warned that Vance was no longer acting like a guide. He was acting like a man waiting for the right moment to let the world fail. Odin then saw it clearly. Vance had not been trying to save the realms. He had been trying to force the others to witness the collapse because he believed only fear could make them accept his harsh answer. He had led them here to prove that the old order was already broken. That truth hit harder than any blow because it meant the enemy was not simply below them. The enemy was also standing among them. Vance finally stepped forward, and the ash around his boots swirled like obedient smoke. His white hair hung over his narrow face, and his expression stayed severe and unreadable. He said the anchor stone had to be removed because a cracked seal would only keep breaking. He said the Titan beast was not the problem, it was the truth the realms had tried to bury. Odin answered that the truth without restraint was ruin, and that wisdom without mercy was just another way to call destruction clean. For one long moment, nobody moved. Then the hidden chains below gave a violent tug, and the floor split wider. A wave of living ash burst up through the crack, forcing Thor back a step and covering the lower stair in a gray storm. Skadi threw her arm across her face and held her ground, while Loki shielded the rune marks on the wall with his own body. Odin struck the floor with his staff, and the pale light flared bright enough to push the ash away from the group. The path to the lower chamber was still there, but only barely. The stone steps were fading under the spread of the ash, and somewhere below them, the Titan beast had begun to turn toward the light. Odin knew they had only moments before the next seal failed, and he also knew that Vance had already made his choice. The way forward was open now, but it led straight into the oldest darkness beneath Yggdrasil, and the next step would decide whether the realms held together or tore apart. The lower chamber waited like a hidden wound beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, and the air there felt cold, heavy, and wrong. Gray living ash floated through the dark like tiny sparks, and it clung to every stone seam, every cracked step, and every carved root line. Odin stood at the front with his tall staff in one hand, his long gray hair hanging over silver armor, his dark blue cloak trailing behind him like a shadow of duty. He was a man burdened by too many ages, and he knew that this was not just another danger below the world tree. If the next seal broke, the Titan beast would rise farther, the roots would crack wider, and every realm above them would begin to suffer. Behind him came Thor, broad and fierce, with red hair, a thick beard, bronze armor, and a red cape that moved like a flame in the dark. Thor wanted one simple thing, to smash whatever threatened the worlds, but even he could feel that brute force alone would not solve this. Loki followed with quiet steps, slim and smooth, black hair framing sharp green eyes, his dark clothes neat even in the dust. He wanted answers, control, and a way to survive what others would call impossible. Skadi came next, tall and calm, silver hair falling over white and gray armor with fur trim. Her pale face showed restraint, but her guarded eyes made it clear that she would not allow the lower chamber to swallow the group without a fight. And Vance walked among them in black ceremonial robes lined with red ash marks, his white hair stark against the dark. He carried himself like a man who had already made peace with ruin. He believed the seals were not salvation, but chains on a truth that should be set free. The fading stone steps bent downward in a narrow line, and each one seemed weaker than the last. Odin lifted his hand, and the group slowed as a fresh drift of ash rolled across the stairway. The ash was alive in a strange way, not like fire but like a swarm that could think. It touched the cracks, spread along them, and made them deepen in front of their eyes. Thor stared at it with a hard jaw and said that he hated anything that moved like a living thing but refused to show its shape. Loki, with a quick glance, told Odin that the ash was reacting to the seal breaks above and below, as if the whole chamber was breathing through old damage. That mattered because the ash was not only dust. It was a sign that the prison was failing from the inside out. Odin knew the danger clearly, and he made that truth plain for the others. The Titan beast beneath the roots was chained by ancient runes and held down by a sacred anchor stone. If the stone lost its hold, the seals of the realms would weaken together, and the collapse would not stop at this chamber. Skadi placed a hand on the wall, felt the vibration in the stone, and warned that the roots of Yggdrasil were already under strain. Her calm voice did not hide the fear in her eyes. She knew the world tree was sacred, and she knew that sacred things could still break. Then the chamber answered them with a deep, slow movement from below. The floor shivered, the ash rose in a pale wave, and somewhere beneath the steps the Titan beast turned toward the light. That movement changed everything at once. The group stopped, and even Thor went still for a breath. From below came a sound like chained mountains grinding against each other, followed by a low pulse that traveled through the roots of Yggdrasil. Odin felt it through his boots and into his bones. He understood then that the Titan beast had sensed them, and more than that, it had sensed hope. The light from their torches and from the glowing runes on the anchor stone had reached it through the dark. Vance watched the dark stairway with a cold, almost satisfied look, and his motive became clear in a way that made the others uneasy. He did not want to save the realms as they were. He wanted the old order broken because he believed the world tree had been built on fear, restraint, and false peace. In his mind, the Titan beast was not a disaster. It was the force needed to end weakness, tear away the broken laws, and make room for a harsher world that only the strong could shape. Loki caught on first and said that Vance was not trying to stop the collapse, but guide it. Vance did not deny it. He said that every realm was already cracking and that holding it together only delayed the truth. His voice was calm, which made it worse. Odin answered him with a stern warning. He said that a world cannot be healed by smashing it and calling that wisdom. Vance replied that old men always fear change, even when change is the only thing that remains. Thor stepped forward with his hammer raised, but Odin stopped him with one sharp look. This was not the moment for a blind clash. They needed the lower chamber, the anchor stone, and the truth hidden beneath the seals. Then Loki did something that none of them expected. He moved toward a half-buried root arch and pressed his hand against a patch of ash that glowed brighter than the rest. The ash pulled back for a moment, and a hidden set of rune lines appeared beneath it, carved into the stone by hands long gone. Loki had seen the pattern before in old records stolen from the halls of the gods, and he understood enough to speak the truth out loud. The anchor stone was not only holding the Titan beast in place, it was also hiding it from the upper realms because the beast was once part of the great design of Yggdrasil itself. That revelation hit the group hard. Skadi looked at Odin with new doubt, and Thor frowned as if the ground had shifted under his feet. Odin had known the Titan beast was ancient, but not that it had once been woven into the first binding of the world tree. If Loki was right, then the beast had not simply been trapped. It had been turned into a lock, a living seal that fed the roots with immense pressure. This meant the chamber below was not just a prison. It was a support point for the entire structure of the realms. Vance smiled when he heard that because the truth served his plan. He said the group finally understood that the old system was rotten at the core. If the Titan beast was part of the first design, then freeing it might force a new balance, one that no council, king, or guardian could control. Odin realized the deeper threat at once. Vance was not insane. He was using a real piece of hidden history to justify a ruinous choice. That made him far more dangerous. Before anyone could answer, the stairway cracked with a loud groan, and a slab of stone fell away into the darkness below. The group staggered, and the air rushed upward in a cold burst that carried more living ash. From the broken opening came a glimpse of the lower chamber, and what they saw made even Thor tighten his grip. The chamber was huge, round, and lined with colossal roots that wrapped around a central pit like ribs around a heart. In that pit sat the Titan beast, chained at the shoulders and neck by glowing iron links and rune bands that looked older than memory. Its body was so large that the dark hid most of it, but its moving outline was enough to make the chamber feel too small. Glowing marks crossed its skin in broken lines, and each time it shifted, the runes flashed like warnings. At the center of the chamber stood the anchor stone, heavy and sacred, sunk into the floor with glowing lines running through its sides like veins of light. Odin knew that if the stone could be secured, the seals might hold a little longer, but he also knew that the beast was waking more fully now, and every second mattered. Skadi said the chamber would not support a long fight. Thor said that had never stopped him before, but even he sounded tense. Loki looked from the beast to Vance and saw the next threat clearly. Vance was not waiting for the collapse. He was waiting for the right moment to strike the stone and break the bind himself. Odin stepped down one careful step at a time, keeping his body between the others and the pit below. His face stayed stern, but inside he was changing because he could see what duty had been doing to him for too long. He had spent ages believing that carrying the burden alone made him strong, but now he saw that strength also meant trusting others before the dark made that choice for him. He called to Thor, Skadi, and Loki with a clear voice, and for the first time he asked them to move as partners, not as followers. Thor answered at once, anger turning into focus. Skadi gave a short nod, then moved to the side to guard the broken stair. Loki slipped toward the runes with careful speed, ready to read the chamber before anyone else could disturb it. Vance raised one hand and sent a pulse of red ash toward the anchor stone, trying to corrupt its glow. Odin struck the floor with his staff, and the force of that blow pushed a ring of light outward through the ash. The first clash was not a battle of steel, but a battle of will, and the chamber answered with a deep tremor. The Titan beast lifted its head in the dark and let out a sound that shook dust from the roots above. The chains pulled tight, the runes flared, and the lower chamber became a place of pure tension. Odin saw then that the next choice would not be simple. If they tried to save the stone by force alone, the beast might wake fully. If they chased Vance, the seals might fail, and if Vance reached the anchor stone first, the realms would begin to tear. So Odin did the one thing Vance had not expected. He told Loki to trust the hidden language of the runes, told Thor to hold the stair, and told Skadi to watch the beast instead of the traitor. Then he moved toward the anchor stone himself, with the oldest darkness opening below him and the next moment already slipping away. The ash swirled higher, the chamber groaned, and Vance smiled as if he had waited for this exact moment for many long years. Yet even as he reached toward the glowing stone, Odin felt another truth stirring in the deep. The Titan beast was not only waking, it was listening. The chamber beneath Yggdrasil was already falling apart, and the air felt heavy with old fear. The great roots of the world tree glowed above and around the heroes, yet the light now looked weak, like a candle in a storm. Living ash drifted through every crack in the stone, and each gray spark seemed to carry a small bit of anger and hunger. Odin stood near the anchor stone with his staff lifted, his long gray hair whipping across his weathered face, while Thor held the broken stair behind him with raw strength and Skadi watched the dark shape below with cold, steady focus. Each of them knew the same hard truth now. If the anchor stone failed, the seals of the realms would break and the Titan beast would rise with no chain left to stop it. Odin was the oldest of them, and the burden on his one good eye was easy to see. He was a man who had spent his long life choosing between bad outcomes, and that day he carried the weight of the realms in his hands. He moved toward the glowing rune stone because he believed the only way forward was to face the danger before anyone else could be swallowed by it. Thor, strong and fierce, wanted to smash the problem with his hammer and protect everyone at once. Loki, slim and sharp-eyed, wanted answers more than victory because he knew a hidden plan always stood behind open betrayal. Skadi, tall and guarded, cared less about speeches and more about what was real, what was moving, and what was trying to trick her attention. Vance, cold and pale in black robes marked with red ash, wanted ruin because he believed the old order had become weak and false. He had not come to save the realms. He had come to break them open and build something new from the ashes. He thought fear would make that rebirth easier. He was wrong, but he was still dangerous. As Odin reached for the anchor stone, the chamber gave a deep groan, and the floor under his boots split in a jagged line. The living ash rose higher, swarming around his knees, then his waist, then his chest like a gray tide with a mind of its own. Vance smiled from the far side of the chamber, and that smile was thin, calm, and sure. He had waited for this collapse, and he wanted Odin to take the final step alone, because he knew the old man would try to save everyone even when it cost him everything. But Odin saw more than Vance wanted him to see. He felt the strange pull in the deep, beneath the chamber, beneath the roots, beneath even the seals. The Titan beast was not only waking, it was listening. The first sign was silence. For one sharp moment, the groaning stone, the crackle of ash, and the shouting of the heroes all faded away. Thor noticed it first, and his eyes widened as he turned his head toward the dark below the broken stair. Skadi tightened her grip and changed her stance, ready for a strike that did not come. Loki, who had been searching the shadows for Vance, stopped moving completely. Then came the second sign, a low pulse that rolled through the roots of Yggdrasil like a heartbeat far too large for any living thing. The sacred bark above them shivered, and glowing lines ran across it in waves, as if the tree itself had heard a voice calling from below. Odin lowered his staff and his stern face hardened. He understood now that the Titan beast was not just stirring in pain, it was reacting with purpose. Someone had taught it to answer pressure, fear, and spoken commands. Vance stepped forward at last, and his white hair caught the ash light like frost. He spoke with a calm voice that carried too easily through the chamber. He told Odin that the world tree had always been a cage and that cages were made to be broken. He said the Titan beast had been trapped for too long, forced into silence by weak rulers who feared change. In his mind, destruction was not cruelty, it was mercy. If the old seals shattered, then the world could be remade without lies, without fragile peace, and without the endless cycle of guarded secrets. His motive was twisted, but it made sense in his own heart. He did not want chaos for fun. He wanted power because he believed only power could shape a better world. He had spent years feeding the ash, weakening the seal, and studying the creature below, waiting for the exact moment when the Titan beast would hear him clearly enough to obey. Loki moved first. He slipped across the broken stone with a quiet speed that seemed almost unnatural, his black hair falling over sharp green eyes as he studied Vance instead of the beast. Loki had realized something important before the others. Vance was not only trying to awaken the Titan beast, he was trying to bind it to his voice through the living ash. The ash was not just decay, it was a carrier for command. It carried traces of old runes, old fear, and old power, and it spread those words through the roots like poison in water. That was why the chamber kept cracking in patterns that matched Vance. That was why the beast was listening. Loki shouted the truth to the others, and that truth changed the whole battle in an instant. If Vance finished the binding spell, the Titan beast would not merely escape, it would answer him first. Thor cursed under his breath and smashed his hammer into the stair support, forcing a falling slab back into place just long enough for Skadi to move. Skadi did not waste the moment. She drove her shoulder into one of the ash-covered pillars and held it steady with all her strength, her silver hair flying around her pale face while her eyes stayed locked on the dark below. She understood that her task was no longer simple guarding. She had to keep the beast from drawing closer while the others cut off Vance. Odin reached the anchor stone at last and pressed his staff against the glowing runes. The stone burned with ancient heat, and for a second he saw flashes of old memory inside it. He saw the first binding of the Titan beast, the fear of the builders, and the reason the seal had been made so deep. The beast had not been chained only because it was strong. It had been chained because it learned. It had once listened to voices, learned their patterns, and used those lessons to break free of lesser prisons. That was the hidden danger the ancients had feared all along. The revelation hit Odin like cold rain. The Titan beast was no mindless monster. It was a thinking force that adapted every time someone tried to restrain it. That was why the seal had needed the anchor stone in the first place. The stone did not only hold the roots together, it held the pattern of command in place so the beast could not learn the shape of its own release. But now the stone was cracked, and Vance had made the chamber noisy with ash, fear, and broken runes. Every sound was teaching the creature more. Odin looked back and saw the Titan beast shift in the darkness beneath the roots. A huge shadow moved there, wide enough to crush a hall, marked with glowing runes that pulsed like angry eyes. It was not fully free, but it was awake enough to understand threat, weakness, and intent. Then Vance raised both hands and the ash around him formed a spinning ring. He began the final command. His voice cut through the chamber with ugly calm, telling the beast to rise, to break the seal, and to take the world tree down with it. The Titan beast answered with a deep roar that shook loose dust from the ceiling and sent waves through the roots of Yggdrasil. Thor had to plant both feet hard to stay standing. Skadi stumbled but kept her balance. Loki grabbed the edge of the broken stair and held on while the stone beneath him slid toward the opening. Odin knew this was the moment he had been dreading since the start. If he tried to seal the beast from above, Vance would force it wider. If he struck Vance first, the command might still reach the creature below, so Odin made the hardest choice of all. He stopped fighting for control and started fighting for understanding. He opened his mind to the hidden pattern inside the anchor stone and saw that the seal could be repaired only if the beast was answered in the right way, not silenced blindly. He called out to Thor and told him to hold the stair no matter what. He told Skadi to keep her eyes on the beast, not the traitor, because the beast now mattered most. He told Loki to stop Vance from completing the ash ring. Then Odin slammed his staff down on the anchor stone and spoke the old words of binding, not as a threat, but as a promise. The rune lines flared bright gold through the gray chamber, and the Titan beast paused. For one terrifying heartbeat, the whole chamber listened. Vance froze in surprise because he had not expected Odin to use the beast's own awareness against it. The old man had understood the hidden truth. A creature that listened could also be guided if it trusted the voice speaking to it. and Odin, burdened and tired as he was, had chosen to become that voice. The beast stirred again, but this time its movement was different. It did not lunge, it leaned. It tested the sound of Odin words through the roots as if judging whether the promise was real. The chamber shook harder and the ash swirled into sharp lines that cut through the light. Vance looked furious now, his calm face breaking at last. He had lost the clean path he wanted and his plan was slipping away. He shouted for the creature to obey him, but the Titan beast no longer answered so easily. Its runes flashed with deep blue light, then gold, then a darker color that seemed to come from under the stone itself. Odin felt the seal begin to move, not break, but shift. It was not enough yet, not even close, but it was something, and that small change gave the heroes a narrow chance. Thor swung his hammer and blasted a wall of ash away from Skadi, opening a clear line toward Vance. Loki lunged in the same breath, fast and precise, aiming not to wound, but to break the ash ring around Vance's hands. Skadi stepped forward at last, her calm face sharp as winter, and she drove Vance back from the edge of the chamber. The traitor staggered, and for the first time he looked afraid. Below them, the Titan beast gave one more heavy movement, and the roots of Yggdrasil cracked wider with a sound like thunder inside stone. Odin kept both hands on the anchor stone and held the new bond with all the strength in his old body. He knew the battle was not over. He could feel that much in the shaking floor and the listening dark. The creature had heard him, but hearing was not the same as trust. Still, for the first time since the collapse began, the heroes had made the Titan beast pause. And in that single pause, a dangerous new path opened, one that could save the realms or end them all if they chose wrong in the next breath. The chamber beneath Yggdrasil felt like the inside of a wounded giant, dark, trembling, and full of old fear. The massive roots stretched in every direction, glowing in places, cracked in others, while gray living ash drifted through the broken air like tiny sparks that wanted to become a fire. Odin stood at the center of it all, one eye fixed on the anchor stone, both hands still pressed to its rune-carved surface. He was a tired man with long gray hair, a dark blue cloak, silver armor, and a weathered face that had carried too many hard choices. He was not here for glory, he was here because the realms would fall if he failed. Around him, Thor waited like a storm held inside a warrior, with red hair, a thick beard, bronze armor, and a red cape that snapped in the shaking wind. Loki watched from the side with black hair, sharp green eyes, and a calm, sly face that never stopped searching for the next move. Skadi stood nearby with silver hair, pale skin, layered white and gray armor, and fur trim that made her look like a mountain queen who had learned how to survive cold. And somewhere beneath the roots, the Titan beast shifted in the dark, chained, ancient, and enormous, its glowing runes moving like slow lightning under stone. The danger was simple and terrible. If the beast broke free, the seals of the realms could fail, and everything above them could collapse into ruin. But if the heroes pushed too hard, they might make the beast panic and strike before they understood its true nature. The pause Odin had forced did not last long. The anchor stone hummed under his hands, and the sound moved through the floor into his bones. It was not a sound of victory. It was more like a deep breath taken by something too large to be seen at once. Thor stepped forward first, lowering his hammer, then stopping when Loki raised one hand without looking away from the dark. Loki had a habit of looking calm when others were afraid, but this time even his voice was careful. He said the beast had not attacked because it had heard a bond, not a threat. That was the part that mattered. The Titan beast did not understand force the way a soldier did. It understood the language of the old seals, the language of command, warning, and claim. Odin had touched the anchor stone in the correct way, and that had reached the creature in a place deeper than rage. Skadi, who had watched the roots of great mountains crack under pressure before, looked down at the ash and said the living ash was spreading faster now because the beast was waking fully. The ash was not dead dust. It was active ruin, a strange force that fed on broken seals and carried fracture from one root to another. If it reached the heart root of Yggdrasil, the whole tree could weaken at once. Vance then stepped out from behind a broken pillar, and his cold white hair and black robes lined with red ash marks made him look like a funeral that had learned to walk. He had pale skin, a narrow face, and a severe expression that held no mercy at all. He wanted the collapse to continue. He believed the realms were weak, old, and corrupt, and that only total destruction could clear away the lies of the ancient gods. He did not see ruin as evil, he saw it as correction. That was why he had opened the fractures below the world tree and fed the living ash into the cracks. He wanted the seals broken forever so a new order could rise from the wreckage. His plan was terrible, but it made sense in the cruel way that made cruel men dangerous. Thor took one step toward Vance, but Odin lifted his staff just enough to stop him. That old movement carried weight, and Thor obeyed at once, though his face burned with anger. Odin understood what Vance wanted, and he also understood the worst truth hidden inside it. If the seals broke in the wrong way, the Titan beast would not simply rampage. It would become a force with no boundary, and the realms would lose the walls that kept their worlds separate. Loki saw the same thing a breath later, because his mind always moved fast when danger grew worse. He said Vance was not trying to release the beast fully. He was trying to force it into panic, then use the anchor stone as a false key to turn the collapse into a controlled flood. Skadi narrowed her eyes and asked why he would ever think that would work. Vance answered without anger, which made him more frightening. He said old structures only stay strong until enough pressure reveals their weakness. He had studied the cracks for years, and he believed the realms would survive the first great fall if guided by a steady hand. He wanted Odin and the others to choose between saving one realm or saving all of them. It was a lie with enough truth inside it to be dangerous. Then the Titan beast moved again. The floor rose under their feet, and a deep chain sound rolled through the chamber as if the world itself had begun to drag something enormous across stone. One glowing eye opened in the dark beneath the roots, then another, and the shape below them pushed against its restraints with a force that made dust rain from the ceiling. Odin felt the bond in the anchor stone tighten, and for a split second he understood the beast with painful clarity. It was not only rage, it was trapped pain, endless duty, and the fury of a being that had been used as a lock for ages. That understanding changed everything. If the creature was only a monster, they could fight it. If it was also a prisoner, then they had to choose a different path. The revelation struck the group hard, but not equally. Thor saw it as a chance to break the chains and finish the threat. Loki saw it as a chance to control the beast by speaking to its buried mind. Skadi saw a chance to protect the roots before the ash spread any farther. Odin saw a deeper danger. The anchor stone was not just holding the seals. It was also part of the prison itself, which meant any move could either steady the creature or tear the whole binding open. That was the twist hidden beneath the battle all along. The Titan beast had not simply been sealed away because it was cruel. It had been turned into a living anchor when the first gods feared the collapse of the realms. Vance knew that history, and he had used it. He had fed the creature anger through the ash, hoping it would strike the chains hard enough to crack them. Odin did not raise his voice when he shared the truth. He did not need to. The chamber seemed to hold still around his words. Thor looked stunned, because a prison made from a living being was a harsher kind of wrong than any battle wound. Loki went pale for the first time since they had entered the chamber. Skadi lowered her head because she understood the burden of being forced to hold the weak points of a world together. Then the Titan beast spoke, not with words, but with a deep, grinding pulse that passed through the roots, the stone, and the stone in Odin's hands. Images flashed into the bond, old and raw. A chain, a hand reaching out, a promise made and broken, a long sleep under the world tree. The creature was not asking to be freed in blind rage. It was asking not to be used again. Odin answered it with a promise of his own, and that promise mattered more than force. He said they would not chain it blindly anymore, and they would not let Vance turn it into a weapon. But before anyone could answer, Vance slammed both hands onto the floor, and the living ash burst upward in a thick gray wave. The ash crawled over the broken stone, over the roots, and toward the anchor stone like a living wound. Thor raised his hammer. Skadi drew forward with cold focus. Loki vanished into shadow with one clean step. And Odin, still bound to the ancient stone, felt the beast surge beneath him as the next choice arrived too fast to stop. The path ahead had opened, but now it was crowded with fear, truth, and a danger none of them could yet control. The chamber shook harder, the ash thickened, and the next move would decide whether trust could hold a world together or whether the darkness below Yggdrasil would finally break free. The chamber beneath Yggdrasil felt less like a room and more like the inside of a buried storm. The walls sweated gray light, the floor shivered with every pull from below, and living ash drifted through the air like restless sparks that clung to stone, armor, and skin. Odin stood bound to the anchor stone with his tall staff still in reach, his long gray hair falling over silver armor, his dark blue cloak torn by the shaking air, and his one eye fixed on the dark seam under the roots. Thor, broad and fierce, planted his boots hard beside the stone, red hair bright against the gloom. his thick beard set tight and his hammer ready in both hands. Skadi, tall and guarded in layered white and gray armor with fur trim, watched from one side with cold focus, while Loki had already vanished into shadow, and that absence felt like a second danger in the room. The problem was now plain to all of them, and it could not be ignored any longer. The Titan beast beneath Yggdrasil was waking, the anchor stone was failing, and if the seals gave way, every realm above would be shaken by the same collapse. Vance wanted that collapse because he believed the old order was broken beyond repair, and he wanted to force a new world out of the ruin. He stood in black ceremonial robes marked with red ash lines, his white hair stark against his pale face, and his narrow mouth curved with calm certainty as if fear only proved he was right. Thor turned first because Thor always moved like a man who refused to let fear speak before him. He looked at Odin, then at Skadi, then at the dark place where Loki had disappeared, and he knew the next choice had to be made fast. "Hold the stone," he said in a rough voice, "or we lose everything." Skadi did not answer at once. She was a woman of the mountains, a ruler in her own right, and she had spent too many years learning that strong words were not the same as true plans. She wanted survival, but she also wanted truth, because the wrong trust could destroy a world just as surely as an enemy could. Her silver hair moved softly in the rising ash as she studied Vance, and her calm face sharpened when she saw how steady he remained. Vance lifted one hand and spoke as if he were explaining a simple lesson. He said the seals were not sacred protection, but a cage built by frightened gods who feared change. He said the Titan beast below was not evil, but a force of deep truth, a living break in a false order, and that the living ash was proof the old binding was already rotting. He wanted the chamber to fail because he believed only a broken world could be rebuilt correctly. That was his motive, and he believed it with such cold force that it became more frightening than anger. Odin heard every word, and his stern face showed no surprise because he had feared this truth for a long time. The beast had not been chained by accident. It had been sealed because long ago it had nearly torn the realms apart, and the anchor stone was the final lock that kept that ancient wound closed. Then the floor bucked hard, and the answer to all their doubt came from below. The Titan beast moved. Its chained body surged against the roots with such power that the chamber groaned, and glowing runes across its vast shadowed form flashed through the cracks like fire under ice. The living ash thickened at once, spinning in angry streams, and the anchor stone answered with a sharp pulse that threw light over Odin, Thor, and Skadi in broken bands. Thor drove his hammer into the floor to steady himself, and the impact sent a ring of force through the chamber, but even he could not stop the tremor. Odin felt the stone against his bonds, felt the seal strain, and knew that raw strength alone would not win this fight. That was when Loki returned, not with a loud entrance but with a clean step out of the shadow behind Vance. His black hair was slick with ash, his green eyes bright with quiet amusement, and his elegant dark clothing made him look like a blade hidden in silk. He had not run away from the fight at all. He had been circling it, waiting for the one opening that mattered. Loki spoke with a soft voice and told them the truth they had not seen yet. Vance had not come merely to break the seals. He had come with a second aim because the beast below was linked to his own ritual markings, and the red ash lines on his robes were not decoration. They were keys. Vance had been feeding the living ash into the chamber in small, secret amounts for days, using it to weaken the rune network from the inside. The ash was alive because it carried a little of the beast's own waking power, and each drifting spark was helping the cracks spread. That was the twist. Clear and cruel. Vance was not trying to free the beast by accident. He was trying to make the seal fail in a controlled way, so he could use the beast's awakening to force the realms into a new shape. Skadi stared at him with sudden anger, and for the first time her guarded calm broke. She had doubted Odin, she had doubted Loki, but now she saw that the coldest man in the chamber had been guiding all of them toward disaster. Vance did not deny it. He only lowered his hand and smiled, as if being understood had finally made him stronger. He said old worlds always begged to be saved, even as they rotted from the inside. He said Odin clung to duty because he feared being wrong, and Thor clung to force because he feared being helpless. He said Loki hid because he feared being seen clearly, and Skadi watched because she feared choosing too soon. Then he said the truth that made the room feel smaller. He had not only come to break the seal. He had come because one of the realms had already started to fade, and he believed only the beast under Yggdrasil held enough power to replace what was being lost. If the old bond held forever, then the realms would weaken one by one. If the bond broke now, he believed he could seize the surge and shape a stronger order from the chaos. His logic was terrible, but it was not empty, and that made him harder to dismiss. Odin closed his eye for a brief moment, and when he opened it again, his burden looked heavier than before. He had always feared that keeping the realms safe might require hard choices, but now he saw that hiding the truth had given men like Vance room to grow. Thor looked at Odin, then at Skadi, and then at the shadow where Loki stood, and for the first time he did not rush to strike. He asked a simpler question instead. "Can we still hold it?" he said. Odin answered that they could, but not alone and not with force alone. The anchor stone needed balance, not just power. Someone had to steady the runes, someone had to break the ash flow, and someone had to draw the beast away from the cracks long enough for the seal to reset. Loki moved first because Loki always moved where others would not. He slid around Vance with careful steps, and the room seemed to darken around him as he traced the red ash lines in the air with 2 fingers. He did not attack with wild force. He cut the ritual pattern instead, and the spell around the chamber stuttered. Vance turned sharply, his calm finally breaking into hard focus, and he sent a wave of black force across the floor. Skadi met it with her own shield of ice-pale light, her boots sliding back as she held firm with both hands and a jaw set like stone. Thor roared and drove forward, not to crush Vance, but to keep him from reaching the anchor stone again. His red cape snapped in the ash wind, and every step of his heavy frame sent courage through the floor itself. Meanwhile, Odin, still bound to the sacred stone, lifted his staff and spoke the old words that tied the seal to the roots. His weathered face tightened with effort, and the glowing lines in the stone answered him one by one. The titan beast below surged again, harder this time, and one of the cracks in the root wall split wide enough to show a moving shadow beneath. No one could ignore the danger now. The beast was not fully free, but it was close enough to matter. Vance saw the moment slipping away, and his eyes became sharp with fury. He shouted that they were all choosing weakness, that they were defending a world that would fail anyway, and that they would regret holding the chain too long. Odin answered him with a voice that carried through the chamber like a bell. He said power without mercy was only ruin, with a proud face. Those words hit harder than any blow because they came from a man who had once used power in the same way and lived long enough to understand the cost. Then the chamber changed again, and the true test began. The living ash stopped drifting and started circling the anchor stone in tight, glowing rings, as if the chamber itself was deciding whom to trust. Skadi saw it first. The ash was responding to fear, anger, and doubt, but it was also responding to truth. It clung less where the bond between them was honest, and it thickened where pride was strongest. That meant the seal could be restored, but only if they worked as one. Skadi shouted for Thor to drive the ash away from the lower runes. Thor did it at once, slamming the hammer down in measured strikes that pushed the glowing dust aside without shattering the floor. Loki whispered a quick direction to Odin, telling him which rune lines were failing first, and Odin adjusted the staff against the anchor stone with exact care. The old man, the storm man, the shadow man, and the mountain woman finally moved with one purpose. Vance saw that unity and seemed almost offended by it. He threw one last burst of black force toward the seal, trying to force the opening wide before they could lock it down. Thor met the blast head-on, and the impact drove him back a step, but not farther. Skadi crossed her arms and held the line. Loki cut the last hidden ash thread. Odin brought the staff down and spoke the final binding word. The anchor stone blazed brighter than before, and the seal slammed shut with a deep sound that rolled through the roots of Yggdrasil like thunder under earth. The titan beast did not vanish, but it was forced back into the dark, its runes dimming for the moment as the chamber steadied. The ash in the air began to thin, and the room grew quiet enough for every breath to matter. No one celebrated because the victory was only partial, and everyone knew it. Vance had been driven back, but he was still standing, still dangerous, and still convinced that he was the only one brave enough to do what must be done. Loki watched him with unreadable eyes, as if he had learned something new about the shape of the threat. Skadi lowered her arms and looked at Odin, and in her face there was less doubt now and more respect, but not complete trust yet. Thor rested the hammer against one shoulder and looked at the dark seam beneath the roots where the beast still waited in hidden silence. Odin, still bound but no longer helpless, felt the weight of command settle in a new way. He had spent too long believing that carrying the burden alone was wisdom. Now he understood that silence had made room for lies, and lies had nearly opened the world to ruin. He told the others that the seal was holding for now, but only just, and that the living ash had shown a deeper fault in the roots. Something under Yggdrasil was changing, and the next shock would be worse if they did not find the source. Vance heard that warning and gave a small cold laugh before stepping back into a cloud of shadowed ash. He did not flee in defeat. He withdrew like a man saving the next move. And that was the hardest part to accept because everyone in the chamber knew the struggle was not over. The seal had held, trust had taken its first real step, and the roots of Yggdrasil had revealed a greater wound than anyone expected. Above them, unseen worlds still depended on what happened next, and the darkness below had only been delayed, not ended. The path forward remained open, but now it was narrower, darker, and far more dangerous than before. The chamber beneath Yggdrasil stayed cold after the seal had held, and that cold felt worse than any storm. Black roots the size of bridges stretched across the floor, glowing bark pulsed with a weak green light, and living ash drifted through the air like tired sparks that refused to fall. Odin stood with his tall staff planted hard against the stone, his one eye fixed on the cracks below. Thor kept one hand on his hammer, breathing slow, trying to stay ready. Loki watched every shadow with sharp green eyes, while Skadi stood at the edge of the broken roots, calm but tense, her silver hair catching the faint light. They all knew the same hard truth now. The seal had not broken yet, but the wound beneath it was growing, and if it widened much more, the worlds above could start to shake apart. Vance stepped out from the drifting ash as if he had always belonged to it. His white hair and black robes looked pale against the dark chamber, and the red ash marks along his clothing glowed like old warnings that he had chosen to ignore. He was not smiling, but there was still pride in his narrow face, because he believed this ruin was proof that he was right. He wanted the old order to fail so a new world could rise from the remains. In his mind, the realms were weak because they were held together by fear of change. He had brought the living ash here not only to crack the seal, but to feed the anger of the Titan beast below. He thought the beast would awaken, break its chains, and force every realm to accept a harsher truth. That was why he mattered. He was not fighting for chaos alone. He was fighting for a world he believed could only be saved by breaking it first. Thor took one heavy step forward, and the stones groaned beneath his boots. He wanted to end Vance before more damage spread, but Odin raised a hand and Thor stopped. Odin knew that anger would only make the chamber more unstable. He also knew something else, something he had not said aloud before now. The anchor stone was not simply a tool that held the seal in place. It was one of the oldest supports of the realm bond, and it had been moved here long ago for a reason. If it stayed where it was, it could keep the roots from splitting wider. If it was taken, the whole structure could fail. Loki noticed the look in Odin's face and understood at once that there was another problem hidden inside the first. He had spent too long as a trickster to miss that kind of silence. The real danger was not only Vance, it was the choice that Vance had forced them to face. Hold the anchor stone where it stood and risk the beast striking through it, or move it and risk opening the seal wider. That choice made the chamber feel smaller, because now every move could save one part of the world while endangering another. Skadi was the first to speak with a steady voice. She had come from the mountain realms where people learned to judge danger by the shape of the ice, and she did not trust Vance for a single breath. Yet she also understood endurance better than anyone there. She looked at the cracked roots and then at the anchor stone, and she said that the stone should be lifted only if someone could guide the roots while it moved. Thor heard that and turned toward her because he knew she was not speaking from pride. She was offering her strength. Loki, however, was already looking deeper because the living ash was acting in a strange way. It did not just float. It was gathering near the base of the roots, drawn toward a hollow place hidden under the stone floor. That meant the ash was not only a poison, it was also a key, and something below was answering it. Then came the twist that changed the room. Odin lowered his staff and revealed that the Titan beast had not been chained only to stop it from escaping. It had been chained to keep it asleep, because long ago the beast had once protected the roots from a force even worse than itself. If the chains failed, the beast might not attack them at all. It might wake in pain and fury, and then it could crush the seal while fighting the hidden enemy still trapped below. The chamber went silent after that because now everyone understood the old fear behind the seal. This was never a simple prison. It was a balancing act built by ancient hands that knew one disaster could be held back only by accepting another. Thor's fierce face changed at once. He had expected a straight fight, but now he saw that strength alone would not solve this. Loki gave a small nod because a hidden trap always became harder when the truth was larger than expected. Skadi closed her eyes for one brief moment, then opened them again with colder resolve, because she understood that mercy and duty could stand in the same room and still disagree. Vance used their hesitation well. He lifted both hands, and the living ash rushed upward in a wide gray stream, turning the chamber dim and hazy. It spread over the roots and clung to the runes in the bark, making the cracks glow red for a short, ugly moment. The floor shuddered. Deep below, the Titan beast moved, and the sound rolled up through the stone like a distant mountain falling apart. Thor charged first, lightning flashing around the head of his hammer, but Vance never met him head-on. Instead, he sent Ash toward the anchor stone, trying to dull the runes and make it slide from its base. Odin struck the ground with his staff and forced a ring of light around the stone, holding it in place for a few more breaths. Loki moved through the ash cloud, silent and quick, and cut open the lines of Vance's spell with careful strikes that looked small but mattered a great deal. Skadi drove her weapon into the floor near the largest crack and anchored the nearby roots with hard white magic from the cold mountain north. Together, they held the chamber for a little while, but Vance kept pressing because he knew time was on his side if he could make the beast wake before the heroes found a better answer. The truth came at last from the roots themselves. As Loki reached the hollow under the stone floor, he found an old rune plate hidden beneath the ash, and on it was a warning written in the language of the first seal builders. The anchor stone could not simply hold the realms together. It had to be answered by a living vow made by someone willing to share the burden. Odin stared at the mark, and for the first time his stern face showed surprise mixed with regret. He had known of the vow, but not how close the failure of that vow had come. Long ago, someone had promised to guard the stone and renew the bond whenever the roots weakened. That promise had been broken, and the wound below Yggdrasil had grown ever since. Now the group understood why the seal was failing again and why Vance had been able to reach it at all. The old promise had faded, and the world had been left with only half its protection. Thor looked at Odin, then at the roots, then at the trembling floor. He knew the next step would cost something real, not in blood, but in strength, trust, and risk. Odin said nothing at first, then told them to move the anchor stone only if they could place a new vow into it before the beast woke fully. That meant the path ahead was still open, but now it was even narrower than before, and everyone in the chamber knew the next choice would decide whether the worlds above would keep standing at all. Vance heard enough to understand that his plan was slipping, and that made his face hard with cold anger. He stepped back into the ash, and his voice carried through the haze like iron scraping stone. He said that the old builders had been cowards because they chained power instead of using it. He said that the worlds above had been built on fear of change, and that he would finish what they started by forcing the truth into the open. Then he struck the floor with both hands, and the ash surged one more time, this time into the cracks around the anchor stone. The chamber gave a deep, dangerous groan. Thor rushed to brace one side of the roots. Skadi moved to the other. Loki looked toward Odin because the old god alone would have to shape the vow if any of them were going to survive the next moment. Odin drew a long breath, and in that breath the weight of endless duty finally showed on his weathered face. He was no longer just guarding a seal, he was choosing what kind of world should come after it. The Titan beast turned beneath them, the chains stretching, the runes flaring, and the roots of Yggdrasil shivered like a living thing waking from a bad dream. The chamber did not fall yet, but everyone there felt the same fear rise in silence, because whatever came next would be far harder than what they had already faced, and the story was only moving into its darkest turn. Deep below the roots of Yggdrasil, the chamber felt like a heart trapped inside stone, beating slow and heavy under an endless mountain of earth. The air was cold, dry, and full of old power, and every wall carried glowing runes that pulsed like tired eyes refusing to close. Odin stood near the anchor stone with his staff planted hard beside him, his one eye fixed on the cracks below the seal, while Thor held the front with his hammer raised, ready for the next shock. Loki moved in the shadows with careful steps, watching every rune line and every shift in the floor, and Skadi stood with quiet control near the broken chain path, her pale face calm even as the roots of the world tree shivered around them. They all knew the same truth now, and it had become the central danger of the night. If the seal failed, the Titan beast would rise far enough to tear the roots apart, and if the roots broke, the realms above would lose their balance and fall into chaos. Vance stood across the chamber in his black ceremonial robes, the red ash marks on his sleeves glowing faintly as living ash drifted around him like restless snow. He had once spoken like a keeper of sacred law, but now his cold face showed a different purpose, and that purpose was simple enough for even Thor to understand. Vance believed the old world had grown weak because it had been protected too long, and he wanted the chamber to collapse so the seal could be broken, the weak order could be burned away, and a harder world could be made from the ruins. He did not call it ruin, though, he called it cleansing. That was what made him dangerous, because he truly believed his own plan was wisdom, and he was willing to let every realm suffer to prove it. When Odin looked at him, he understood that this was not just rebellion, but a choice between two futures, one built on duty and one built on cruel change. The Titan beast shifted again beneath the roots, and the chains pulled tight with a deep metallic scream that rolled through the chamber like thunder trapped underground. One of the glowing runes on its skin flared, then another, and the shock pushed dust from the ceiling in a slow rain. Thor slammed his hammer into the stone floor to steady himself, and the impact sent a burst of force across the cracks, holding one split line shut for a moment. His fierce face tightened, because he was not fighting for pride now, but for everyone who still lived above the roots and never knew how close the world was to breaking. Loki crouched by a line of ancient markings on the wall, his sharp green eyes narrowing as he traced the symbols with 2 fingers, and then he saw something that changed the shape of the whole struggle. The seal was not built to hold the Titan beast alone. It was built to bind the beast to the anchor stone, and the anchor stone was not only a lock. It was a choice stone, made long ago so one ruler could decide whether the world should be preserved or reshaped when the old power became too dangerous. That discovery hit the chamber like a cold blade of truth, because it meant the whole burden had been waiting for Odin from the beginning. Skadi turned toward him, and in her steady voice she said what the others were already thinking. The old keepers had hidden the real purpose of the anchor stone because they feared that any ruler with a full mind would still be forced to choose between safety and change. Odin did not answer at once. His weathered face hardened, and for a few long breaths he looked less like a king and more like a man who had carried too much for too long. Then he understood why the seal had never truly been about stopping the Titan beast forever. It had been about keeping a final decision locked away until the moment the world could no longer avoid it. That was why his choice now mattered more than any battle. If he held the old seal too long, the chamber would break from pressure. If he opened it the wrong way, the Titan beast would surge free. If he changed the seal, he might save the roots, but he might also awaken a power none of them could control. Vance saw the doubt in Odin and used it at once. He lifted both hands, and the living ash around him grew thicker, drifting over the floor and climbing into the cracks as if the stone itself wanted to come apart. The ash was strange because it was not dead dust. It carried a faint life of its own, and wherever it settled, the broken lines spread wider and the old stone lost its grip. Vance had fed it with bitter rune powder from hidden jars at his belt, and now the chamber began to answer his command. He wanted the chamber to weaken just enough for the seal to fail, because only then could he force a new order into the empty space left behind. Thor lunged forward, but Skadi caught his shoulder and held him back, knowing the ash would spread faster if he crashed through it blindly. Instead, she planted her feet and called out for the others to stay together, because Vance was not fighting with strength alone. He was fighting with timing, and timing could beat even a hammer if no one understood the trap. Loki moved first because he understood traps better than anyone there. He slipped along the wall, low and fast, and reached the anchor stone before Vance could fully cloud the chamber with ash. The stone was heavier than any man could lift, but it was also carved with thin lines that matched the roots around it, and Loki saw that the outer runes were not broken by age. They had been cracked on purpose. Someone had done this long before, and now the shape of that old betrayal became clear. The keepers had not only feared the Titan beast. They had feared each other. They had split the final key into a body of stone and a pattern of intent so that no single person could act without showing their hand. Loki looked back toward Odin and shouted that the stone could still be used, but only if the person holding it accepted what it truly was. It was not a prison key. It was a burden of judgment. Then Vance made his boldest move. He stepped into the ash cloud, and with a cold calm that made his face almost blank, he spoke the final sequence to wake the cracked lines below the seal. The chamber answered with a deep groan, and the Titan beast below thrashed so hard that one chain support bent sideways. Thor roared and charged, forcing his way through the ash with raw strength, and his hammer struck Vance hard enough to drive him back several steps. But Vance smiled through the impact because he had wanted that clash. He had wanted Thor to commit fully, and while Thor was locked in front, Vance reached for Odin with a second command hidden inside the first. The command was meant to force the anchor stone to choose collapse over balance. For one tense moment, Odin saw the trap too late. He could feel the old seal tearing from both sides, and he knew that if he reacted with fear, the whole chamber would fall apart. So Odin did the one thing none of them expected. He lowered his staff, knelt beside the anchor stone, and placed his hand flat against its glowing surface. His voice was low, but it carried through the chamber like iron through fire. He did not command the stone to hold forever. He commanded it to remember what it had been made for. The runes on the stone answered in a sudden flash, and the glowing lines spread out through the floor like a web of light. The cracks paused. The ash stopped drifting for one brief heartbeat. Even the titan beast beneath the roots slowed its violent pull. Then the chamber shook again, stronger than before, because Vance had not been fully stopped. He staggered back, his cold face breaking at last into anger, and he shouted that Odin was choosing weakness over renewal. Odin rose slowly, his stern eye fixed on him, and said that renewal without care was only another name for ruin. That single answer changed the air in the room because it made the battle clear. This was no longer about who could break the seal. It was about who deserved to decide the future of the realms. The anchor stone began to glow brighter, but not with full control. It was opening a narrow path, just enough to keep the roots from snapping and just enough to hold the titan beast in place for a little longer. Skadi saw the new pattern first and called out that the stone was not locking the beast tighter. It was redirecting the strain into the deepest roots where Yggdrasil could bear it for now. That meant the world tree was not simply a victim. It was a living support, and if it could endure the force, the chamber might survive. Yet the danger did not end there, because the titan beast felt the change and turned its massive body toward the new pressure with a slow, terrible patience. The runes on its skin brightened in answer, and one of its great chained limbs rose through the darkness, testing the barrier like a fist against a door. Thor planted his feet and lifted his hammer again, ready to meet it, while Loki moved beside Odin to read the next line of runes before they could fail. Vance, breathing hard for the first time, pulled back into the ash and smiled with bitter certainty, because he had learned enough to know that the next turn would demand a sacrifice from someone in the chamber. The story did not end here. It only deepened, and all of them felt it, because the next choice would decide whether the roots of Yggdrasil held together or split apart forever. The chamber below Yggdrasil stayed dark, but it was not silent. Ash drifted through the air like tired sparks, and every line of the old stone floor glowed and cracked under the weight of ancient power. Odin stood at the center with his tall staff, his long gray hair hanging beside his weathered face, while Thor kept his hammer ready near the broken wall, and Skadi watched the shadows with a calm face that hid deep worry. Loki, slim and sharp-eyed, moved beside Odin with careful steps because he alone could read the next runes fast enough to matter. Above them all, the world tree pulsed through the ceiling and walls, and its roots carried the pain of every realm. The danger was now plain to everyone in the chamber. If the seal failed, the roots would split apart, the realms would lose their balance, and the titan beast beneath them would rise without control. Vance stood in the ash at the edge of the room, pale and still in his black robes lined with red ash marks, and he watched the others with cold certainty. He believed that the old order was already broken, and he wanted to force the end before the end could come for him first. Loki leaned close to the rune stone and read the next line aloud, his voice low and steady, while Odin listened with the heavy patience of a man who had carried too much for too long. The runes did not speak of victory. They spoke of cost. They said the anchor stone could hold the seal, but only if it was fed by a willing life force from within the chamber. That truth landed like ice across the room. Thor tightened his grip on the hammer and looked at Odin, then at the glowing stone, and then at the cracked floor below, because he understood what the words meant even before anyone said them out loud. Someone had to give the chamber enough power to close the wound under Yggdrasil. Skadi stepped forward, her silver hair bright against her white and gray armor, and she asked the question that all of them feared. Who would stay behind long enough to anchor the seal? Odin did not answer at once. He looked toward Vance because he knew that Vance had been waiting for exactly this kind of truth. Vance smiled with bitter calm and said that sacrifice was the only honest law left. He said the realms had become weak because leaders always begged for mercy when the old structure demanded payment. He wanted the tree to break if that would prove his vision, because in his mind only ruin could end false hope. His motive was simple and terrible. He had seen many seals fail in his studies, and each time he had decided that mercy was only a delay before collapse. He wanted to tear the old balance apart so that no one could hide behind it again. Thor took one step forward, ready to strike Vance down if he made a move, but Odin lifted his staff and held him back with a look that spoke louder than words. Odin knew that if they wasted strength on anger, the chamber would finish them all. Loki, who often hid his true thoughts behind a sly smile, surprised everyone by speaking plainly. He said the runes had one more rule that Vance had missed. The sacrifice did not have to be a person alone. It could also be a vow, a bond, or a burden freely accepted by more than one heart if the one inside the chamber accepted the cost together. That was the twist none of them had expected, and it changed everything. The chamber did not want blood, it wanted true commitment. It wanted someone to carry the weight without lying about it. Skadi narrowed her eyes and studied Loki for a long moment because she understood that he had known more than he first admitted. Loki did not deny it. He said he had found the hidden line in the runes while they were traveling through the roots, but he had waited to speak until the chamber demanded the truth. He had feared that Vance would use the knowledge too soon, and he had been right. Vance drew back in the ash, his face hardening, because he had planned to use the sacrifice rule as proof that despair was the only honest answer. Now he saw that the chamber allowed another path, and that meant the others still had a chance to refuse his philosophy. Then the titan beast below the roots moved again. The floor rose and shuddered, the chain links snapped tight, and a wave of living ash burst through the cracks in a slow gray storm. The beast itself remained hidden, but its size could be felt in every tremor. It was far too large to fight in a simple way. The glowing runes on its skin flashed under the stone like eyes opening in the dark, and the whole chamber answered with a painful groan. Thor spread his feet and braced his body, ready to meet the next wave of force, while Skadi formed a shield line with a hand gesture and pushed the ash back from the center. Odin turned toward the anchor stone, which rested in a shallow cradle of broken rock, and he understood that the true battle was not against the beast alone. The battle was against panic, selfishness, and the urge to run from hard truth. Vance saw Odin make that choice, and his cold expression sharpened into anger. He had wanted the others to break under the pressure. He had wanted them to choose fear so that his own belief would look wise. Instead, they stood together. So Vance reached into the ash and pulled out a smaller rune shard that had been hidden near his sleeve. It was a fragment of an older seal, one he had carried into the chamber in secret. He had not come only to observe. He had come prepared to force a collapse if the others refused him. He threw the shard toward the cracked wall, and the stone split open with a flash of red light, sending a hard shock through the room. For one sharp moment, the chamber tilted toward disaster. The anchor stone rose slightly from its cradle, the living ash swirled harder, and the titan beast below gave a deep, grinding pull against its chains. Thor lunged to stop the rune shard from finishing its damage, and Skadi moved with him, her armor flashing under the dim light as she sealed one side of the crack with frozen pressure from the mountain magic she carried in her steady hands. Loki slipped through the chaos with quick steps and reached the shattered stone first, pressing his palm against the rune lines to slow the spread. Odin saw the whole shape of the crisis at once. If they fought as separate people, the chamber would win. If one person tried to carry the burden alone, the seal would fail. So he did the one thing that mattered most. He spoke their names one by one, and he asked them to trust the bond between them. Thor, who had always wanted to solve every problem with strength, finally lowered his anger into purpose. Skadi, who had spent much of the journey guarding her own heart, admitted that she wanted the realms to survive because she had seen too many winters destroy the weak. Loki, whose hidden plan had carried them this far, said he would give the truth to the runes if Odin would give the vow. Vance watched all of this with growing fury because he could feel the chamber moving away from his control. He tried to speak another harsh word, but the ash around his feet rose and clung to his robes as if even the chamber rejected his certainty. He had believed that fear would make him right. Instead, fear made the others stronger together. Odin stepped to the anchor stone and placed both hands on its glowing surface. His stern face did not soften, but his eye carried a painful kind of hope. He said the seal could hold if they each accepted a part of the burden, and if one of them gave the final vow at the same time. The others moved closer. Thor set his hammer beside the stone, not to surrender it, but to lend its force to the seal. Skadi placed her hand over Odin and then over Loki, linking the line of trust. Loki spoke the missing words from the runes, his voice steady now, and the chamber answered with a deep pulse that ran through the roots of Yggdrasil. The living ash pulled inward for a breath, then shot outward again as the seal began to form. Vance tried one last time to break the circle. He stepped forward through the ash and said that all of them were fools for choosing unity over logic. Odin finally looked at him with clear pity and said that logic without mercy always became ruin. The words hit harder than any blow. Vance froze because he could see that his own path had brought him to the edge of being alone. He was not defeated yet, but his control was slipping fast. Below the stone, the Titan beast gave another violent pull, and one of the larger chains snapped loose with a terrible metallic crack. The chamber shook so hard that dust fell from the ceiling, and a wide red glow pushed up from the crack under the anchor stone. Odin felt the seal strain, and he knew the next moment would demand a final choice from someone in the chamber. So he held his staff tighter. Thor set his shoulders like a wall. Loki kept the rune line alive. Skadi guarded the center, and Vance stared at the widening glow with a face full of cold shock, because the chamber was opening one more secret, and none of them yet knew who it would ask to pay the last price. The story did not end there. It leaned forward into the dark, and the roots of Yggdrasil trembled as if they were about to speak. The chamber beneath Yggdrasil glowed like a wound in the dark, and every root around it trembled with warning. Odin stood at the front with his tall staff raised, his single eye fixed on the widening light. Thor braced beside him like a shield of iron. Loki kept the rune line steady with quick hands, and Skadi held the center with calm strength. Vance watched from the edge, his white hair pale in the glow, because he had come here to stop the old power forever, even if the world had to break first. Then the roots split open with a deep stone groan, and living ash poured into the chamber like gray sparks. It clung to the walls, crawled across the floor, and fed the cracks that had already started to spread. From below, the Titan beast moved against its chains, and the whole chamber shook. Its glowing runes flashed once, then dimmed, as if some older seal was waking up to challenge it. Thor lifted his hammer, but Odin stopped him with one sharp motion, because brute force would only wake the beast fully. Loki stared at the rune line and finally understood the secret. The chamber was not asking for destruction. It was asking for a guardian. Long ago, Odin had hidden the anchor stone inside the roots, not to trap the Titan beast alone, but to bind its power to the tree and keep all realms linked in peace. Vance had found part of that truth, but he had learned it wrong. He thought the seals were a trap built to control everyone, so he brought the rune shard to shatter them and end the fear. When Vance raised the rune shard, the ash surged toward his hand, and the chamber screamed with light. Skadi rushed in and knocked his arm aside, while Thor slammed his hammer into the floor and forced the ash back in a burst of fire and stone. Odin stepped to the anchor stone, placed both hands on its glowing surface, and chose not to destroy the bond, but to strengthen it. The roots of Yggdrasil answered him at once, the chains tightened, and the Titan beast sank back into silence. The glow faded, the cracks sealed, and Vance fell to his knees in stunned shame because the truth had been bigger than his anger. He had wanted release, but Odin had chosen responsibility. As dawn light touched the roots above, the realms held together, and Thor, Loki, and Skadi stood beside Odin not as rivals, but as protectors of the world they had saved together.